Welcome back for part two of wildland fire behavior, where we're looking at how the fire behavior factors all work together. We're watching for alignment, where factors build on top of each other. And I've mentioned that we need to think of when those factors build on top of each other, not as addition, but as multiplication. I use the term exponential growth. I'm doing this lecture during the time of COVID, and that's been the great concern. The world concern is exponential growth, and that is that if one person gets it, then they go home and their family gets it. So that's an exponential growth where one person added to 5 people or whatever the size of the family, then now we've got growth that then if they go to work before they realize they're sick, then now they take it to their workplace and now we've got 20 people or 50 people. And that's exponential growth. So where it's multiplying, not necessarily 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. So we would need to think of wildland fire behavior factors in this sense when they're adding on top of each other, or so we call that alignment, and that's our second A in wildland firefighting. But we're looking for opportunities where the fire's out of alignment, where we can take advantage of that and make huge progress, and trying to stay out of the way when it is in alignment. After you watch this video, I want you to, of course, as I said before, watch the Loop and Glen Allen fires video, and there's going to be an assignment associated with that. I think I'm going to change that to a pop quiz instead of something you fill out at home, but I will still have the paper for you to fill out as if you were doing it as a discussion in class, in-person class, but then you can use that paper to help you when you take the pop quiz. Okay, but there's also going to be another paper written by a Captain Ken Newitt from the U.S. Forest Service, who's an extremely experienced wildland firefighter. He has a page on Facebook. I think he's also on Twitter, Captain Ken Newitt. But he's shares his experience, and in this one paper, I kind of cleaned it up. It was from a blog that he wrote out kind of sloppily, so I kind of put it in order with bullet points to help you out. It's really good information of things to watch out for and a story that he tells of a situation where seeing the factors saved his crew. Okay, so I'm going to get going here. Our book talks about the a triangle with 7 factors. Now, I talk about the 3 times 3, weather, fuel, topography, and then under each one, there are 3 major factors. Our book breaks it down to 7. I just like symmetry. I like to think of things, okay, I have to remember the big 3, fuel, weather, topography. Okay, under each one I need to remember 3. Under weather, it's temperature, moisture, wind. So that's easier for me. But our book talks about it this way, and let's look at it because it is, there's some good information here for how we need to watch for alignment. Things that should be, if we see them happening, cluing us into, okay, we need to be very aware and keep our head on a swivel, look up, look down, look all around. So fuel characteristics, fuel moisture, fuel temperature, topography and aspect, wind, atmospheric stability, fire behavior. These are the 7 factors that, they're saying these things add up to extreme fire behavior. Okay, so fuel characteristic indicators. We want to be aware that when we're in fine fuels, they're the spreader of wildland fires. And when you have continuous fine fuels, you can have extreme rapid rates of spread, especially if there's a breeze. It doesn't have to be a big wind, just a breeze, or if it's on a slope. So fine flashy fuels are one of the common denominators in your ERG, where it talks about common denominators of fatal fires. So, these pictures are very telling of what's going on right now in California. We have a lot of dead trees, a lot of dead brush. We make a big deal about dead trees. I was just reading an article yesterday about even the giant sequoias who've survived 2,000 years of fires coming and going, of extreme weather, extreme cold as well as extreme hot, and they're starting to die. They're starting to lose some of the big giant sequoias, and that's extremely significant because they're survivors. And we're talking 2,000-year-old trees that are falling over. So it's kind of crazy. So, watch for bug or frost kill areas. And as we know, here in California, the big issue with the drought is the bark beetle. And the bark beetle gets into the trees because they're stressed out from the drought. And when they're stressed, they can't produce enough sap to protect themselves. The sap is like our skin. It's what keeps viruses and bacteria getting inside us. Our vulnerable points, as they've discussed so much with COVID, are our eyes, our nose, our mouth. We need to be careful to not be touching our face. Well, those are our vulnerable points. With the trees, it's when they don't have enough sap, that's when bugs can get in. So we've got a lot of dead out there. When you're in areas where there's a lot of dead, expect extreme fire behavior. Spacing is another issue that we need to think of, and we've talked about how crowning can happen if the trees are less than 20 feet apart. And Ken Newitt points out this point pretty heavily, that when we have available ladder fuels, when we can see that there's a clear path for the fire to get from the base of a tree to the top of a tree, that's a great concern. So the fewer the ladder fuels, the better. And when there are lots of ladder fuels, then the fire is able to move into the tops, and we have the potential again for crowning. Fuel moisture is a big deal, and of course, fuel temperature affects fuel moisture. So fuel moisture determines if the fuels are going to be available to burn. Dead fuels burn easier than green fuels. So relative humidity of 25% or less will allow fine fuels to burn with extreme intensity. The larger fuels are going to slowly react to the relative humidity and to the temperature of the environment. So anything that breaks easily, if you hear crunchy, snap, crackle, pop when you're walking, then you know that you're in an area where it's dry and it'll burn. So fuel moistures that are below 7%, that's an indicator of dry conditions. And every morning, those reports come out, or every week the forestry department puts out these reports of what the fuel moistures are in fine and in larger fuels. So fuel temperature indicators, we need to think about aspect a lot. So are the fuels in the sun? What is their situation? Because that same dry dead fuel on an east slope at 2 o'clock in the afternoon is a little bit less vulnerable to that same fuel on a southwest aspect as the day is wearing on. So we got to think about where they are in relation to the sun, to the time of day, whether it's getting direct sunlight or not, and what the fuel temperature is. The higher the fuel temperature, the closer it is to its ignition point. So that's why this is so important to us, because fuels have to heat up to their ignition point before they'll burn. If it's already high in temperature, then it just needs a little bit more to get there. Now, let's move on to topography. Our terrain indicators that we need to be thinking about are what we've talked about again and again and again. Any kind of steep slope, fire's going to want to go uphill, and it burns faster uphill. Box canyons, chutes, saddles, narrow canyons, all can give you the chimney effect where the fire's just going to go up the flue. Wind speed and direction is also important in relation to both weather and to topography. So when the wind speed and the direction is in the same, excuse me, the wind speed is going to influence the direction, and it's going to influence the speed of spread. So wind provides that means for big fire runs, and if the wind and the topography are working together, if the wind is in the same direction as the slope, you're going to have the potential for area ignition. Now add aspect to that if it's already preheated fuel. That's our big three, our dangerous three: wind plus slope. Actually, we should say wind times slope times aspect equals area ignition or a blow up. So 10 mile per hour winds or greater, we're very concerned. Now, for some fire behavior indicators that we should be looking for, and one of them is a smoke column. When you're on your way to the fire, you should be watching the horizon, and this top right picture is where I fought fire all the time. That's on the way up the 5, just past Castaic, and that's a fire up in an area where we got fires all the time, near Templin Highway. Between Templin Highway and Gorman is just an area we get a lot of fires from car fires, or people throwing cigarettes, or trucks dragging a chain that's sparking, whatever it might be, or arson. So that column is going straight up, and that's actually good news, even though it's pretty dark and black and we know it's got into the brush. That's not as concerning to me as these bottom two photographs where we have a leaning smoke column, which means we have wind-driven fire, rapid rate of spread, and more spotting ahead of the fire. So wind speed and direction is important because it's the most influential fire behavior factor. Okay, that's just, I beat that dead horse, and I'm going to beat it again. Pay attention to what the wind is doing. It provides that wind-driven fire runs, it transports firebrands, and I just said that. So also watch for any kind of our big columns. Now, sometimes you can't see the column where you are fighting fire, so you need to get reports from other people. But when you see a sheared smoke column and the smoke is rising straight up and then it's sheared off by strong winds aloft, know that you've got the potential for long-range spotting, and any kind of strong winds that are up high can come down and eventually start influencing the surface. The other kind of smoke column that we're extremely concerned about is any kind of pyrocumulus cloud formation. So look at that double-headed beast there. That's the 30-mile fire up in Washington near Twisp in the Okanagan Forest. And that's an indicator underneath. So, we've got a very open flue, right? We've got unstable air, and the vertical movement is extreme. So all of that heat is rising up rapidly and pulling with it oxygen into the fire underneath, which makes for a more extreme fire. So intense burning conditions, unpredictable fire spread, look for strong downburst potential and for winds being pulled in. The people underneath this pyrocumulus cloud said that when the fire came at them, it sounded like a jet engine as it was just eating the forest ahead of it, crowning and making this huge crown run that killed 4 or 5 firefighters. And I just love this picture. So I had to show one more pyrocumulus, but note the distinct layers. So we've got the red, the really black, then the gray, and the white tops. So this is, remember, ice crystals up here in the white tops. Now, there's a couple of videos of this on our videos page, and a collapsing smoke column, and twisting. This is something to be very concerned about. In fact, one of the videos about collapsing rotating plumes talks about a group of firefighters that were taking pictures and standing there watching this, mesmerized by it, and not realizing that it was causing the fire to flank them and put them in extreme danger. So downdraft winds can cause the fire to run in all directions, and this is indications of those downdrafts. You've got a collapsing, downward rotating column. Okay. Some other fire behavior indicators we always need to be paying attention to is any kind of torching. So you might not be able to see the smoke column above you, but what you're going to see is lots of firebrands and embers being rained down on you, torching. So any of these things, like the temperature rises, the humidity drops, any increase in wind, or any combination of all three is something where you need to be concerned. If you see fire whirls, that's an indicator of you're in unstable air and you're in a place where you have conflicting winds that are causing a rotation. So it's also an indicator of a strong convective column. So know that there's going to be spotting, and these babies can have enough unburned material in them that they can cross roads. They can do things that you just don't expect are going to happen. And, you know, I've read stories of 2 firefighters that survived being picked up by one. One came out unburned. One came out severely burned. So just, you don't want to be in the way of these babies. When you're seeing a lot of spotting, that's a sign that conditions are deteriorating. So there's several environmental factors that contribute to extreme fire behavior, and you know, they're pretty basic here, but they're what's going on right now and is about to happen. So this is September as I'm doing this video. We're about to go into Santa Ana. So we got a Santa Ana coming in the next couple of days. It's going to be a milder Santa Ana, but October, November are our Santa Ana months. And we've already got all of these other environmental factors. So, well, the availability of fuel, we are starting to run out of fuels because we've had so many big fires in the last 3 years. But drought is a big issue here in California, and it's been a prolonged drought that's kind of got little respites every once in a while. But this thing has been going on since about the 80s or 90s. You know, I remember when I was a young man in high school, we were getting tons of rain. Things were fine. There was none of these issues. We weren't looking at dead trees in the mountains. And since then, this prolonged coming and going drought, more dry than wet, has caused a situation where there's an enormous amount of dead fuel out there. So add to that a wind event or any kind of dry, unstable air mass. And those are not always the same, but they can be the same, or 2 different extreme situations: dry, unstable air mass or wind event. And we've talked a lot about this, so I'm not going to beat this dead horse much more. But crown runs there's little that you can do, so you want to get out of the way. And airdrops ahead of the fire can help slow it, but really fire breaks are the only thing that are going to stop it. So when it runs out of fuel, it dies. But once it gets going, or if weather change can help stop it too. So some kind of a change in the weather or the conditions, or that it runs out of fuel. If not, once it gets going, it just keeps going. It's one of the most dramatic and spectacular events you might see in a fire, and you've seen the videos that I included earlier. If you didn't watch those, go back to, I believe it was in chapter 1, I had some videos about the crown fires. You need to watch that. They can move at a rate of 5 miles per hour or more, and guess what? You can't outrun that. So you need to be in a safety zone away from where the crown run is going. And other kinds of fuels can crown. Heavy brush can crown. So a passive crown fire is what we've been calling torching, and but this has a lot to do with the surface fire, what's going on underneath it. And torching is when there is some ladder fuels that can get it up into the crowns, but it doesn't continue. So just pay attention to passive crown fires are a warning that an active crown fire can get going. Now, it is dependent on the heat coming up from the surface fire, more transfer of heat from one burning crown to the next unburned crown, and then it can start running ahead of the surface fire, or the surface fire sometimes can go ahead of it. So, like I've said before, you can have a run through the same area 2, very rare occasions, maybe even 3 times, where if there's enough unburned fuel, it comes through a 3rd time. But usually surface fire before or behind once it gets up into the crowns, and then the crown does its thing. Okay, last little bit here. Area ignition is something, anywhere where you're seeing area ignition, you've got extreme conditions. Now, this is the Esperanza fire, where 5 firefighters died, and they had area ignition in the area. They had a big canyon and lots of spotting going on, and when you get spots that are peppering around, and you've got preheated fuel and you've got winds going on. Most of the time when I've seen area ignition, it's been on a hillside, but this one happened in a canyon, and it can even happen on the flat. It just depends on those conditions where the heat is so much that, like a flashover inside a room, a whole hillside, a whole field will the whole thing is on fire at once. So it has also a little bit to do with the convective action, and they all kind of connect, and then boom, all the fuels explode in fire at once. So just a couple more slides about wind-driven fires. Our big fires, our plume-driven fires and our wind-driven fires, are the fires that are just going to take up a ton of fuel and burn extremely fast. So most of our fires in Southern California in the past that have become large have been wind-driven fires. Now, because of the drought, we're seeing fires that aren't necessarily driven by the wind, but drought conditions plus topography plus available fuels has made for fires like the Thomas Fire, like our current Cedar Fire, our Bobcat Fire, and that other big one, Camp Fire, that was up north. These were not as much driven by wind as conditions. But for the most part, we're coming into Santa Ana condition time period, and the column is pushed over by the wind. The spotting happens ahead of the fire, so we have an extremely rapid rate of spread. So most fires, I'm sorry, I accidentally hit that. Most fires that become large are driven by the wind. Okay, so here's some great photographs of Santa Ana fires. One, a satellite photograph where you can see how the convective columns are being pushed all the way out to Catalina and beyond. You get long-range spotting, but now the one thing that, for the most part, the direction of spread is predictable, so don't get in the way. I had a chief who went the wrong way and led our whole strike team into the way of the fire. And fortunately, we had some places where we were able to shelter as it went right over us. Some of the equipment and some of my hose got damaged. Some of we had a broom that was up on top that caught fire. We had to put that out. But we were all safe, and it went by us, and it was kind of scary, but for the most part, it's predictable. That shouldn't happen. That was the mistake of our leader. The flanks of the fires are going to be the safe place to attack, and we're going to talk about in a couple next week or the week after that, wildland-urban interface firefighting, where we're going to go and just protect buildings. We're not really going to fight the fire as much as we're going to try and limit its damage. So now, when you are dealing with wind-driven fires, don't forget about this. As the Santa Ana condition subsides, you need to be concerned about wind shifts. Sometimes the last couple of days of a Santa Ana fire are where we get people hurt, and that's what happened at the Calabasas fire when 2 Glendale firefighters and a bunch of LA City firefighters got burnt. One Glendale fire extremely burned. He's still alive. He's a friend of a friend. But yeah, that was predictable, but they weren't ready. And then lastly, plume-driven fires. So whenever you have a plume-driven fire, there can be increased intensity, and this is what happened in the station fire. It's one of the last fires we're going to look at and study a little bit towards the end of this class. 2 very experienced firefighters, one of them I had an enormous amount of respect for, a great firefighter, and was totally caught by surprise by the spread that was way faster than anticipated, and spotting was occurring all around them. 300-foot flame lengths estimated. So it was all because it was a plume-driven fire, and they weren't aware of those conditions. So the direction of spread is going to be difficult to predict. You can get downdrafts, and you can get convective action that causes a fire to go faster and in directions that you weren't able to predict. So there's 2 types of wind events that can accompany a plume-driven fire. So that's the indrafts and the downdrafts. So the indrafts is what I was talking about, where it's sucking oxygen in underneath, which causes winds coming inward and pushing up the action of the fire, the convective action. And then, of course, as we've talked about before, the downdrafts that can occur below the convective column, and it can push the fire in 4 different directions at once. Okay, that's the end of part 2. Don't forget to do the loop fire, Glen Allen fire assignment, and don't forget to look at that paper that Ken Newitt wrote that I will post just after this video. Okay, thanks a lot, guys. Hang in there. Contact me with any questions.